As a CEO of an organization or part of a senior management team, you will be involved in change and transformation of your organization. These changes will be driven by you as the management team, or these changes could come from external. Strategic changes, sometimes your structural changes, mergers and acquisitions, a crisis in the industry, a issue that is impact your company. All these changes will require you to respond, which requires you to communicate with wider group of stakeholders. And in that context, you will also consider the requirement of rebranding. And the rebranding necessarily doesn't mean a logo color change. It could be a personality change. It could be an association with another brand. It could even be your message that you're communicating. In the recent past, we've seen the Kiehl's rebranding looking to reposition Kiehl's in the sustainability space with a heightened focus of fresh. And they're responding to the external environmental changes in the Sri Lankan market where the consumer is going greener and concerned about health and nutrition. We've seen a little old story of Dunkin' Donuts, whose business does not predominantly depend on donuts, coffee, and the rest of the breakfast, having an issue with their brand, having donuts in it, and had to drop that symbol, drop the donut of their symbolism, and go to Dunkin'. And that requires a rebranding strategy. My involvement in NDB over 10 years, we were a development bank some time ago called National Development Bank, and NDB stood for that. And the bank took almost a decade to reposition and rebrand through a rebranding exercise. And as they celebrate the 40th year today, they've come a long way with their stakeholders to achieve that brand identity and the positioning and the perceptions that they desire. So this is your topic, read about it. You have your textbook, which is pretty extensive. That is a Managing Corporate Reputation CIM course book, summarized. You have the other textbooks from Frombrun, Davis, Olin, Roger. So all that will come handy, including the content from the reputationinstitute.com and any other wider reading. To start this task, you got to understand the examiner wants you to focus on employees' perception in your brand identity and the role of employees in case and when you decide a rebranding. So that flavor has to keep coming all along. Being a digital corporate communication assignment, we got to continuously look for digital interfaces, digital behaviors in this whole process. So employees and digital, keep that in mind. To start this task, there are many options. My favorite option is generally, what's the contextual focus? What's the elephant in the room? What's the big factor? If it was Dunkin' Donuts, the big factor is percentage revenue coming from donuts being insignificant, and the need to drive the organization to become a wider player such as a Starbucks, where people will come for a coffee and their lifestyle needs. If it was McDonald's, I would show the 1 billion revenue drop year on year and the reputation drop on their rep track year on year. In today's context, I will also pick the issue of their CEO the sex scandal. I don't know whether I have the right to call it the sex scandal, but an employee relationship which was not seen positively, which is now going viral. So, what's the issue at hand, and how does that issue impact to your reputation and profitability, and why that requires a potential review of a rebranding. So when you set that up clearly with proper evidence and some theory, you could move on to show how your company could look at a holistic view of reputation management, looking at image research, identity audit, personality audit, and focus on the discussion that we need to do with employees and brand. So that holistic framework that connects all these components could come from Phil, which is our favorite model for this situation, which includes everything, including the unplanned communication part. Some of you might use Van Driel, again, who talks about a multifaceted model. A framework could be Frombrun or any other. And try to link the employee aspect into this framework, either adapting it or bringing a model and plugging it into this, because that's the focus. So after you set the framework, you could move on and start discussing, maybe a heading, the importance of stakeholder and importantly employee perception with regard to managing your brand identity. So think of the right type of heading to get this conversation going. This is where you will talk about the topic of employee engagement, compare different authors who's given certain dimensions that are required for positive employee engagement. The open and honest conversation required from Green and Hunt. It could be what Frombrun spoken a lot in his book on employee engagement factors. It could be the chapter 10 on your text, which gives you models of engagement. Don't just list them down, don't just describe them, but critically evaluate what are the success factors, maybe 3 to 4, of driving employee engagement. There onwards, you might want to discuss about what's the current context briefly in your company's brand identity. Using a simple model, you would understand where are they on their symbolism, where are they on their communication. In other words, what are the current management messages going, what are the corporate messages going, what are the marketing focus at the moment, the symbolism. Example, McDonald's, the vision at the moment is to become a modern progressive burger company. Their behaviors in their service is fairly getting digitalized with the kiosk and the apps. Their service behavior, which used to be cheerful and friendly, is now becoming more digital. So likewise, you could quickly contextualize what's happening with the brand identity. And then you would discuss the fact that the employee perception on this brand identity is what you are looking to critically evaluate. It's not a bad idea to show the context of the internal employee mix. What percentage of employees have been there for 20 years and above, 10 years above, less than 3 years, what's your gender mix, and what's your generation mix, the millennial mix to baby boomer mix. If there have been a significant change in this mix, it's good to establish that factor also. Now with that in mind, you will do a detailed stakeholder map, which I believe will go to your annexure. Don't just stop with employees. The annexure should look at all stakeholders and extra focus on employees. Remember, there's nothing called employees. You got to break them up to frontline employees, to fulfillment center employees. If it's like an Amazon, they're a huge group. If it's an insurance company, the sales teams are almost 80%. If it's a Cargills or a Keels, again, the frontline girls and boys, a bank. If it's a software companies, the engineers. If it's an airline, the pilots, the cabin crew, and again, the engineers and the ground handling staff. All of them can disrupt or enable anything you plan to do. If you have unions, SLT example in Sri Lanka has maybe 20 unions. So you got to be very specific. The more you are specific, more we take you seriously. And give us some evidence from where you're getting this information. So look at the stakeholder mix. discuss the context. I'm now looking at a table. Look at the power, the interest that they have, the power of that stakeholder, and then prioritize the importance. Who are the high priority? Obviously, the ones with high interest and high impact. But even a smaller group who is potential to disrupt or enable you, you got to look at. That is based on Mendelau example. And then you would look at their attributes that they prioritize at the moment. Some of these attributes would have changed over the last 5 years. Example, the millennial workforce, their priorities against the baby boomers are very different. Baby boomers traditionally looked at lifetime employment, retirement, benefits, whereas the millennials are looking at interesting work, they are looking at interactivity, direct communication with senior management, they are looking for sustainability agenda of the company, the values. These attributes that are prioritized have to be brought through some reading, not just ad hoc. And then look at how your company is currently performing in some of these attributes. Your company might not open up CSR opportunities for employees to volunteer, hence, which comes under behavior in the identity conversation. You might find that employee perception is negative in that context. You might have a symbolism change happening in your digitalization of, let's say, the stores in McDonald's context, and your older employees might find it a negative factor. Even the young part-time millennials who sees that their part-time job opportunities are getting cut down. McDonald's over the last 5 years cut down their workforce from 400,000 to 200,000. Clearly, the employees know that their opportunities to find work is limited. So that could create, when they can't get their friend to get a job in the McDonald's in the neighborhood, their perceptions could be negative about the organization. So understand some of these factors and map the perception in your annexure. Then if you want to build in a bit more impressive discussion, you could look at, from Egan's point of view, who are your allies, who are your partners, who are your adversaries, based on some of these factors. So we're looking at some specific, in the table, evidences, sources. It should be pretty rich because it's your annexure. You can put a screenshot or two to justify some of the things you're talking about. There could have been employee walkouts, employee rallies to support the brand. Show us some stuff, right? Because this is your analysis. Now, out of that, bring in the top 3 to 4 employee groups into a table in the body of the report. Present it briefly, don't write a lot of stuff. It should be very visible and visual. And then on paragraphs, start critically evaluating what's driving this perception positively or negatively in your company. So make it a good debate. Don't just explain. X, Y, and factors are driving a positive perception. The CEO communication in the recent past or the unplanned communication that's happening with regard to the CEO could be a factor that is driving a negative perception. Bring them, compare and contrast. If you want to give a quick benchmark of a similar situation in another company, indicate that. That shows your wider reading. If you want to give like a percentage of such issues in companies, like an insight, indicate that. Make your critical evaluation rich. Remember, employee perceptions, we are also looking for positive perceptions of employees. Say why that's the case. Because you need some of those employees to be your advocates later if you decide and when you decide to do your rebranding. So we are looking at hopefully 1 or 2 positive and a couple of negative perception situations. And try to use your Chris Phil, who talks about the perception metrics using a company's performance on those attributes and the attributes importance of the attributes and the perception of your performance. Example, if workplace ethics or equal pay is an important attribute in a particular group, how are you perceived to perform in that? Based on your identity, what you are saying, what you are doing, and what you are showing. Symbols, communication, and behavior. So map it nicely, summarize the 3 key findings, which ones are in your problem area, which ones are your positive, and it sets the platform for the last part of this task. And the last part is, what's the impact of this current employee perception on external stakeholders? So you could talk about the stakeholder interlink in a company. Now this discussion is in your textbook, how multi-stakeholders are interlinked to each other. They don't live in isolation. Even an employee connects with public, and in the public you might have a supplier. So there are multiple interfaces. So bring a bit of concept theory around it. Then talk about maybe 1 or 2. So customer impact due to frontline staff context or perception, and then discuss what that impact could be. If the frontline staff are demotivated, frontline staff are looking to leave, and that could easily have a negative impact on your customers. So this employee context again has to be justified based on your analysis. The customer context, where customers are feeling that negativity, you could bring it through reviews, a screenshot of something you could find, some customer satisfaction survey findings, etc. Try to find insights, evidence from your company. If you can't, look at some industry statistics of other companies' situations, other companies' Glassdoor ratings, other companies' customer ratings, and justify with assumptions similar situations could be relevant to your company. But you've got to give evidence. Got to give evidence. As a final conclusion here, you will show another 1 or 2 big issues and positives, how the employee perception is impacting positively customers, or how the frontline employees, or the fulfillment employee current perception is having a direct issue with customers. Overall, senior management negativity is having a negative or positive perception on investors, because they interface with investors, they communicate with investors, and showcase that as your final 3 findings. So after a critical evaluation, there always has to be strengths, weaknesses, as long as they're justified. Once again, remember to maintain the employee flavor. Remember to interface digital factors. Now, when you benchmark companies like Burberry, etc., you will find some internal communications include internal social media factors, platforms such as Chatter to Yammer to Workforce. So some of these could be benchmarked and see whether your company has them. And if you don't have some of that, those are going to affect a negative perception, especially in your millennial employees. So bring a digital factor also, and bring that as a key finding that is impacting your current context in the stakeholder interfaces. So that's almost a wrap on your task 1B for your corporate digital communications, December 2019.